George Washington, his life and challenges. George Washington's life. George Washington was one of the greatest leaders in America. He was the commander of the American Army before becoming the president. In addition, before becoming the president, he used to like farming and doing business. For example, when his tobacco crops were not doing well, he exchanged them for more diversified crops like buckwheat, hemp, and alfalfa. George Washington discovered 300 uses for peanuts and other soybeans and pecans when he was an agricultural chemist in the United States. To the Southern farmers, he helped them economically by encouraging them to grow chill sauce, instant coffee, and talcum powder. George Washington was a respected leader because he guided the American troops to many victories. Although without modern knowledge of germs, Washington made sure cleanliness among his soldiers was maintained. He even threatened his soldiers who disobeyed maintaining cleanliness with the court-martial. During his free time, George Washington was a fine horseman. Although he liked to knit in private, he did not want his friends to know that his secret hobby. Challenges as a commander. George Washington had many challenges when he was the commander of the American Army. He faced many difficulties in trying to keep the United States Army intact despite the problems that the Army was going through, for example, the lack of weapons and ammunition. George Washington knew the revolution against the British in the United States could succeed because they were weak, so his ambition was to keep the American Army intact. During the dark days of defeats, George Washington had to appease Congress and jealous state governments to offset the shortage in material and arms support that was needed during the war. Sometimes George Washington had to deal with impulsive subordinate commanders in his army who did not have self-discipline. Self-discipline in the army was important to George Washington, but most of the soldiers in his army lacked self-discipline, which was essential in winning wars. There was a problem with soldiers, in terms of making sacrifices to the country. Washington believed one has to make sacrifices in order to win any war. He also believed soldiers should be patriotic to the country and not the army, and he wanted the soldiers to do that. President George Washington. England in 1793 did not want to follow the Treaty of Paris until the United States paid all the debt to the British. The British Army started to seize the American ships which were operating in the Atlantic Ocean. As a result of that, there was civil disorder in the American cities due to lack of supplies. George Washington was able to avert the war when he sent Chief Justice John Jay to negotiate with the British on the action the British had taken. A treaty known as the Jay Treaty was signed. In 1758, George Washington was elected to the House of Burgess in the United States. During his time in the House, he pressed strongly against England. Also, he was in the First and Second Continental Congress. At first, George Washington supported an agreement that would bring cooperation between America and Britain. But when a certain time passed, he realized that there could not be any cooperation between the two countries. When he won elections to become the President of America, his cooperation among his workers and fellow cabinet members made him popular. It is believed that his cabinet appointments were not challenged before the House because of his popularity. During his tenure as the president, he faced two major battles. The first problem was concerning the interpretation of the American Constitution. He had opposition. Secondly, during the war between Britain and France, the opposition took sides. But as for him, he did not take any side. In 1789, reservations were created in America so that Indian tribes were assigned the land to get those tribes out of the way of onrushing settlers in America. These reservations provided legal justification for Americans to grab lands from the Indian tribes who were the natives of most of the land in America. The Indians were given land that was considered to be less desirable by the Americans of European descent. During his presidency, George Washington was able to increase these reservations to include many Indians. George Washington and slavery. George Washington's attitude towards slavery changed as he was elected. When he was the President of the United States during the American Revolution, he and fellow patriots strove to liberate the slaves in America. George Washington became increasingly conscious of the suffering slaves were going through. He feared that abolishing slavery in America would tear the country apart. He set an example by giving freedom to slaves under his possession.